I'd like to call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for June 7, 2021. Thank you all for being here. We have four...
Recording in progress.
Okay. We've called to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for June 7, 2021. Thank you all for joining us. We have three study items on our agenda tonight. Item number one is Urban Renewal Authority Tax Increment Revenue Bonds. Item number two is outdoor recreation equipment on private property. And item number three is a review of council rules of order and procedure. We start our study session meetings with citizens' comment on items that are on the agenda. If there's anyone with us tonight from the public who would like to speak on items number 1, 2, or 3, now is your opportunity to do so. We have a speakers list coming forward. Thank you. So our first speaker tonight is Peter Baccarini, and on deck will be Kathleen Baccarini, speaking on agenda item number 2. So if you'd like to come to the podium right here, I believe you can come up now and sure, come up to the podium. I do. I have one more, just one on, one at the podium and one on deck, and then there'll be one following Kathleen. So, and if you would please give us your first name and last name, if you'd spell your last name for the record, and give us your address.
My name is Peter Baccarini. That's B-A-C-C-A-R-I-N-I. And address 11065 Linda Vista Drive, Lakewood, Colorado.
Please continue, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for allowing me to be the first speaker at your first session this year. Welcome back from COVID. We basically own the property on West 35th Street since 2013, and it really is a great and vibrant neighborhood. We're certainly used to a lot of buzz and noise and folks coming around there. There's 2 pools, actually. We're lucky enough to have neighbors on one side who's got a pool and the other side who've got a pool. So we're used to kids having fun, splashing around and noise. But the issue with the half pipe that is being built at the end of our yard, it's, I don't know if you've all seen the photographs, it's about 30 foot high by our estimate. It's something like 30 foot long as well, constructed of plywood, and it's sort of right there next to our fence overlooking the backyard. And it really is, in our view, a different beast. Essentially, it looks like a permanent structure. It's got concrete stanchions that hold it down. And basically, we believe that it's not an ideal place for it to be at the bottom of our yard over the fence. So that's why we're here this evening. The major issues really is, one is noise. It really is an intrusive noise at the end of the day. There's multiple adult skaters who start, I don't know if any of you are skaters here, but this is a half pipe. They start on the top, and there's lots of camaraderie, which is a great thing, but then they launch off and they whoosh down, and all the whooshing is amplified by the plywood and hollow nature of the device. And then there's obviously crashing and a lot of yelping as folks pick themselves up. And this can happen multiple times for many hours, and the intensity and volume is such that you can't basically tune this stuff out. It's not like a couple of kids playing in the backyard. So it really is imposing. We hear it, you can hear it in the front of the house, the back of the house. I've been doing a lot of yard work there recently, and you can hear it the front, the back, and our tenant who's here will testify that they can hear it obviously very, very well inside the house as well. Second issue, so the result of that is that it basically, there's no sanctuary in your own house. You're waiting for the noise to happen again, when will it come? And when it does, it's very, very disturbing. So we believe that it's more than you should really have to put up with as an owner, a tenant, or a resident there. So the next one is privacy. Basically, there is no privacy when you're in the backyard and the skaters are there. They hang out on the deck, and they're looking down at you. They're looking down through your windows potentially. I'm not saying it's deliberate, but they are there and they're looking down and having fun. And you don't feel as if it's your backyard anymore with these 8 guys having a party on the deck overlooking your house at the end of the day. It's got lights all around the periphery, which is very nice, which means they can run it night and day if they'd like, depending on how much exercise they'd like to get and how many folks they can have come around and enjoy the fun. At the end of the day, it's something that is very, very intrusive. You don't feel as if it's your property anymore. So in conclusion, this type of structure we don't believe belongs in a family neighborhood. We understand the right to have fun and enjoy yourself, but this is taken to a different limit. It's an invasion of the privacy and the quality of life as well. The noise is debilitating, and it'd be great to have some sort of solution to safeguard our sanctity and our sanity. So thank you for considering it. Thank you much.
Thank you.
All right.
And our next speaker is Kathleen Baccarini and Dawn Quasar on deck. And I forgot to mention, and we're just newly back in the chambers, but our clerk is able to activate the timing device. So you'll see a green light go on, and that's when you're logged in and ready to go. And then I think at the orange light, you have 15 seconds. And maybe when the red light comes on, you've got, your time is up.
Okay,
So if you'd wrap it up then.
great, thank you. You ready? Okay. Good evening. My name is Kathleen Baccarini, and thank you for hosting us this evening. We bought our home on our quite peaceful neighborhood in Wheat Ridge back in 2013. It's a super quiet neighborhood, West 35th Ave, walking distance to Prospect Valley Elementary School. So your normal, beautiful Wheat Ridge neighborhood street. I am a realtor, by the way. So it was closed for my kids at the time to the school, the rec center, the parks, and everything. And our younger son loves to skate, so he was thrilled when the skate park happened on Kipling and 38th. We lived there from 2013 to 2015, and then we moved overseas for work until 2018, so we rented our home. Our tenants moved out, so we had a management company. The tenants moved out this past fall in either late October or beginning of November, and I went over to see the house. I hadn't been there for a little while, and I was absolutely horrified when I walked to the backyard and saw this monstrous structure that was 2/3 of the entire property line in the backyard that was imposing there. So I immediately contacted the city of Wheat Ridge because I was just shocked in my 15 years as a realtor. Throughout Denver metro area, north and south, I've never seen a recreational structure of this size and nature in any yard. Yes, you can see larger pools and things. The difference with this was the impact on the property for us in how much it encroaches with the view, with the privacy, with how much we have to see it, and the visibility into our home. That was just a shock. After going through the process with the city of Wheat Ridge, I was told that under current code, it was basically a recreational structure, just like a basketball hoop or a swimming pool or a trampoline. The difference to me on those items is none of those can see over a property line. A pool is in ground in the structure. I don't see the people. I hear them occasionally. This is a structure that has a massive storage area at the back, has 2 landing decks on top, has lights and electric on it. So how it's called a simple recreational structure, and I never see children on it, actually. You've only seen adults. So after that process with Wheat Ridge, I was advised I could speak to a counselor, and I spoke to Amanda Weaver, who was very helpful in helping me get through this process. I feel as a realtor, it's my duty to know for my clients. I certainly know if I went to sell the property, the first thing a prospective person's going to ask me is, what is it, and what's going to happen about it. So I know we're limited right now, and we need an answer on where this will go. Some of my questions: is there no limitation on the size, the dimensions of a recreation structure in Wheat Ridge? How could I advise a client if they're wanting to purchase, potentially on how big a structure they could put in? Could they put one in even bigger than this? This is the potential future for Wheat Ridge I see if nothing is done about this. And how does it affect an entire neighborhood? It's like, you know, whether you're in the backyard or front yard, I can't sit out there and enjoy it or invite guests over not knowing if this is going to start up. Trust me, it's not a good noise. So I don't know what's defined as a play structure, and does a play structure have storage, entertainment, music, and lights? Because it certainly feels like an entertainment venue. Could I put a deck or addition on my home to be built this high or this close to a property line and a major Excel line?
I might
Yeah.
ask you to kind of wrap it up.
Okay. So my last thing is to prevent even more structures, and really for the residents of Wheat Ridge, how can we address this issue in our neighborhood and adjoining our property? We at this point, would really like some answers on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dawn, if you'd come in, and if you'd please give us your first name and your last name, and spell your last name and your address.
Yes, my name's Dawn Quaiser. Last name is Quaiser, and I live at 10745 West 35th Avenue in Wheat Ridge.
Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so I rent the house that we're speaking of on 35th Avenue, and it is very loud, and the privacy issue, I live there with my son, and I do feel like it's intrusive walking out. I mean, I can't really be outside if they're on the structure without someone looking down. Also, I do work from home at times and would have to, I can hear it with the doors and windows shut. I can only imagine what it's going to be like when I do want to open the doors and windows over the summer months. It's super loud in the basement where my son has his bedroom and stuff. I don't know if it's because it's more closer to the ground or what have you, but it's a little disturbing also. And mainly it's just you don't want to really hang out in your backyard because you feel like you are being seen and it's loud. You not know how, sometimes it is in the evening and it is during the day. I have seen kids out there too. It's kind of a mixture, but mainly adults. So mainly I'm just here to say it is a little intrusive and loud, and that's really all I have to say.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for
Yep.
coming to speak with council this evening. That's all of the individuals that I have signed up on our roster. Is there anyone who hasn't signed up who would like to speak at this time under citizens' right to speak? Okay. Should I be asking about online people? Are we
I think normally,
live
yes.
on Zoom?
If there's anyone who would like to just put their hand up if they'd like to speak. I don't think so, Mayor.
Okay. If there's no more people here and no more people virtually, then we will close our citizens' right to speak and go to our first agenda item. This is number 1, Urban Renewal Authority Tax Increment Revenue Bonds. Mr. Goff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Council Chambers. It's great to be back. We do have a couple items this evening, and a couple staff members here to help with this item. I'm going to introduce it, kick it off, and turn it over to Steve Art. He'll introduce our guest. I did brief Council several weeks ago about an activity of the Wheat Ridge Urban Renewal Authority, and Councilmember Hoppy is the City Council's representative on that board, and she's been at those meetings. But the Urban Renewal Authority is issuing tax-exempt bonds this summer in July, I believe. We're hoping to shoot for July. And really taking advantage of a lot of the growth in our community. The tax-exempt bonds they're looking at are property increment bonds only. Really capturing the increase in property tax values in I-70 Kipling corridor urban renewal area. There's a lot of development. That area does include the Applewood Shopping Center, the Clear Creek Crossing development, and our G-Line TOD Ward station area. So there's been a lot of development in those areas. We're seeing a lot of property tax increment. We're going to see a lot of property tax increment over the next several years. So the Urban Renewal Authority is going to take advantage of that and capture those increment dollars and issue bonds and to help fund many, many projects. And there's a list in your packet that has a list of those projects. I don't think the Urban Renewal Authority will finalize that list at their next meeting. I think their meeting's on June, when's your next meeting? June 15th. But the primary reason we went down this route was to help us finish the infrastructure projects up at the Ward TOD Center. If you remember, the City Council agreed to divert some of the funding that was from the 2E bonds, the city's sales tax bonds that were issued back in 2017. We diverted some of those funds to the Clear Creek Crossing project to finish the infrastructure that was needed for that site, and that is wrapping up in the next week or two. And the agreement is that the developer of that site, Evergreen, will reimburse the city approximately about $10 million for those funds that were diverted. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to see those dollars for, not this year, probably not until next year, and it may not all come in at once. So we want to meet our promises to our voters and get those projects done up at the Wheat Ridge Ward Station. So this is one avenue, one way to do that for the Urban Renewal Authority to issue these bonds. And I think we've allocated about $15 million from these bonds to finish those projects up there. Basically 52nd Avenue, Ridge Road, Tabor, the pedestrian bridge over the tracks, and the pedestrian path down to the frontage road by I-70. And then there's other projects on the list that will also help relieve some of the pressure on our CIP budget, our capital improvement budget. Two of the projects are typical CIP projects, one of those being improvements to the 38th and Kipling interchange, which was budgeted, and it's already designed, and it was supposed to be in the budget for this year, but because of COVID, we did cut that project. And then there's also a bridge repair project on Kipling, which was also in the CIP budget, and we cut that. So these funds will also help with those types of projects. So, I'm going to stop there, actually, and turn it over to Steve Art, and he can give any more updates on that. And again, we have our bond counsel and underwriters in the back here. We'll have them come up if they want to speak. But Steve, you want to
Thank you very much,
introduce your
Mr.
guest?
Goff. Hi, Steve Art, Executive Director of the Wheat Ridge Urban Renewal Authority. Really exciting time, and I thank Mr. Goff for outlining what we're doing. If you look on that list of activities that we're going to be doing, it really does help improve movement, beauty, aesthetics throughout our community. And they are all public improvements that we are doing. So what we're going to be asking from you is consensus tonight to move forward with two separate resolutions, which we hope to bring to you at your next meeting. The easiest of the resolutions that I'll start with is an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement between the Wheat Ridge Urban Renewal Authority and the City of Wheat Ridge, because these bond funds are going to flow to the Urban Renewal Authority, but the vast majority of all the activities that you see in the projects on here will be managed by the city through private contractors. So there needs to be a mechanism that will flow that money from the Urban Renewal Authority to the city. So this IGA rectifies that situation, allows the Urban Renewal Authority to be the holder of the funds, and then as bills and invoices come in, the Urban Renewal Authority would reimburse the city. That's a pretty basic IGA with the Urban Renewal Authority. I'm going to hand the next one over to Sally Tasker. Sally Tasker works for Butler Snow, and they're acting as bond counsel for us here. So they're doing all the legal ends, all the resolution that you see, all the agreements that you will see were done by Butler Snow. We also have with us tonight Mark Reagan and Liam O'Connell from Piper Sandler, and Piper Sandler is the underwriter of this. So they're the ones taking all of our numbers, putting them into their bowl and pulling out that magic number of what we can bond for based upon tax increments that will be flowing into the Urban Renewal Authority. Before I get in any deeper, I want to introduce Sally, who is the expert on this, and we'll talk about the resolution, the replenishment resolution, as well as the cooperation agreement tied with that. And gentlemen, if you care to harp in any time, feel free to head to the microphone.
Good evening, Sally Tasker with Butler Snow, and we are bond counsel to the Urban Renewal Authority for the issuance of these tax-exempt bonds. So the way you're going to get the money to do these projects is the underwriters are going to take these to the market, and they'll be sold, and then the proceeds will go to the URA, the net proceeds, and then they will spend them on these various projects. So as we were talking to the underwriter about in the city about the best way to structure the transaction, one of the things is the rating agencies like the city's credit. And so one of the things that will secure the bonds is a reserve fund. So the bonds will be payable solely or primarily from these property tax increment revenues from the urban renewal area. So as you know, the base is frozen at a certain level, and then as the assessed value goes up from these various improvements, the taxes that are levied on this additional amount are the tax increment revenues that come to the URA to pay for these various projects that are helping the property taxes rise. So as they get the money, they're going to be pledging them to the payment of these bonds. And so the bonds will also be secured by money in a reserve fund. So if that money is not sufficient to pay the bonds at any time, then the trustee will have the right to draw on a reserve fund. And it's usually about 10% of the proceeds of the bonds, roughly, is what the reserve fund will be. So if the bonds are $50 million principal amount, there'll be a $5 million reserve fund. Usually it's also about 1 year's worth of debt service. So that makes investors in these bonds, because they'll be publicly sold, that makes them feel more secure, that if there's some dip in the revenue in 1 year, then there's money sitting there to pay them. And what we're asking the city to do, and the city's actually done this before on these transactions, is to adopt a resolution of your present intention that if this reserve fund is drawn on to pay the bonds, or if for whatever reason it's not up to the certain level that we've told the investors it will be at, that the city manager will come to the city council and ask you to replenish the reserve fund up to that level. So let's say we're $500,000 short and one payment, the trustee draws in the reserve fund, the bondholders get paid. Now, if there's enough property tax increment revenue coming in before the next payment is due, then that will just flow into the reserve fund. So there's a flow of funds, and in it will go. But if for some reason there is a shortage, then you will be asked at that time to make a replenishment of the reserve fund. So in my example, that'd be $500,000. Now, if you choose not to do that, that's totally fine, sole discretion. There's no impact on the bonds. The bonds don't go into default. It's non-binding. There's no obligation on the city. But that being said, the credit agencies, the rating agencies like that. And so because if the city chooses to adopt this replenishment resolution, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a moral obligation resolution because there's no legal obligation. But if you do adopt this, then the rating on the bonds will be higher. And if the rating on the bonds is higher, then the interest rate on the bonds is lower, so there'll be lower borrowing costs. So ultimately, this is being done to assure the investors that not only do we have the TIF revenues behind this, but also the city will back this in your sole discretion. So that's the reason we're doing it, and you have done this in the past. There's many entities that will do this, just basically to put people more at ease with the credit or to get a higher credit rating. And if you do replenish the reserve fund, the cooperation agreement is also being approved by the same resolution. And that's basically between the city and the authority that says if the city makes the loan or the replenishment, it's a loan to the authority. So the next available revenues that are coming in from the property tax that aren't needed to pay the bonds would be paid back to the city. So it is subordinate. We can't put the obligation to the city ahead of the bondholders or even on the same. They need the first bite of the apple. But once those start flowing again, then the city would get paid back. You're not going to get interest on your money, but you would get paid back. So that's kind of the gist. There will just be one resolution I don't know if it's in your packet, but there's one resolution, and then there's a cooperation agreement. The other part of the cooperation agreement just says that the city will continue to lend employees and things to the URA for their functions. So is there any questions on this? I did want to add, before I let you talk, the bonds are not an obligation of the city. They are solely payable from these property tax increment revenues and monies in the reserve fund. And as the monies come in, the authority remits them over to the trustee. And so we've got the money locked down to increase the security for the bondholders and to increase the rating. So that's kind of it from
Should
my
we,
perspective.
yeah, should we have our representatives, maybe from Piper, talk about their analysis of the TIF capacity, and you can come up to this mic if you'd like.
All right, thanks for the intro, Sally. I think she did a great job of explaining what the moral obligation would do on a high level. Just to put some numbers to that, without the moral obligation, the credit would likely be a non-rated credit going to the market, and it's certainly a transaction that we can execute on, but right now we're seeing rates for non-rated credits similar to the URA for TIF issuances, issue at around a 5% interest rate. With the moral obligation, we expect that the issuance could get a rating in the single A category, which is the second investment grade category. And that would bring the interest rates down in the current market to around 3%. So it's a pretty significant reduction in interest rate. And not only does that help with lowering debt service, but it allows the authority to issue the bonds with a little bit more premium, and we can get into that if we want to, but essentially what that does is increase the capacity for funding projects. So right now, based on the initial reports we've seen from Arlen and Associates on the projects being built there and the future absorption expectations, along with a fairly conservative biennial reassessment. We project biennial reassessment in our TIF models at 2%. And I know that Wheat Ridge has been blowing that out of the water for a long time. That's what investors are typically comfortable with. So there's a conservative nature to that. And on top of that, with the projections, those conservative projections, we structured the bonds with a coverage ratio of approximately 1.3 times. So what that means is we project out the cash flow we think these projects that are coming out of the ground and that are in the permitting process have, and we structure the bonds to have debt service in any individual year at, or the revenues to be 1.3 times what our debt service is. So there is a cushion, a pretty substantial cushion in our projections. Again, that would be used before the city had to step in on the moral obligation. Another thing that the authority has done very well is set this issuance up right in time with the call date coming up on the 2018 bonds. So there's a refinancing opportunity. The 2018 bonds that the authority has right now are currently outstanding at a 4.6%. And we're projecting that we can get that roughly down to a 2%. So we can cut that more than in half, again, to increase capacity for the authority. So the bottom line is right now we're projecting net proceeds after all costs are paid of right around $44.4 million for the authority. And the refunding component would be another $6 million, but that is projected to save roughly $540,000 over the next, I believe it's 7 years. So it's almost an 8.5% savings on that piece as well. The new money bonds would be structured with a final maturity of 2040, which is the sunset date on the TIF area, with a call date in 2031. So there would be an opportunity in 10 years to refinance these at a lower rate if market conditions are favorable.
And just to remind council, if you didn't catch that, and I guess there might have been some new council members since 2018, right? Is that, yep. The 2018 bonds was a bank loan that the Urban Renewal Authority got for the Clear Creek Crossing project. It was in the amount of a net $5 million, but the loan was about $6.3 million. So that was a bank loan. No debt service payments have been made on that yet. But that's the 2018 bonds that he was mentioning, so that we could refinance and pay off with this bond and get a much lower rate, which is great, and save $500,000.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor and City Manager, but we lost our Zoom a little bit ago, and I don't know if that means we also lost our Channel 8, and if that means we need to pause the meeting until we can resume as an open meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hoppy. I'm so sorry. We have an issue with the podium computer, which is our main Zoom feed, so we're going to need to restart that. Is there a way, Mayor, we could pause for just a moment to see if we can get that fired back up?
Yes, we can take a pause. Just before we do, may I ask you to just introduce yourself for the record?
Yeah, Mark Reagan from Piper Sandler.
Thank you very much. Let's take a short recess. I understand that we've lost our Zoom connection, but we do have YouTube and Channel 8 live, carrying our meeting live tonight and on tape delay. So once again, we apologize for the technical difficulties, but we will power through this. So thank you very much for your presentation, and I believe we're ready for questions from council.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, if I could too,
Yes.
just to remind, again, for the new council members, I'm sorry, time flies, but Sally Tasker with Butler Snow was our bond counsel on the city's sales tax revenue bonds that were done in 2017. So she has familiarity with the city, and that's not the only, you worked on the bank loans too.
As
So
well as- yeah.
Sally's been before us many times.
Our two previous replenishment
Yeah.
resolutions.
Okay, questions from council? Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you have any idea of what percentage of the properties within the Renewal District area already have some sort of property tax incentive deal on them? Or if this is instituted, would that preclude a property from engaging in some sort of incentive?
I'll address the issue of what we have existing. I'll let Sally talk about if a new development came along and wanted TIF, what we would do there. Currently, right now, within that area, we do have some agreements with the Kipling Ridge Shopping Center. That obligation should be paid off in about 2024. So then that entire property tax increment can be used to repay these bonds. We have an agreement with the Hacienda Colorado, what we're calling Applewood North, the Walmart reuse, and Shared Family Trust, Swiss Flower and Gifts, the rebuilding of those. Those are the current TIF obligations we have in that area. We also have the 2018 Clear Creek Crossing, but those will be paid off. So Sally, someone comes along and wants to do a new TIF deal with us. I'll let you explain what has to be
That's a
done.
great question. So part of the documents you may not be getting because you're the city council, but the part of the bond documents are what we call a trust indenture. And it lists we list under prior obligations all the commitments that the URA currently has to developers under cooperation agreements, and sometimes it's metro districts. And so when these tax increments revenues come in, property tax, and sometimes sales tax, although this is just a property tax, when it comes in, sometimes you've had developers come in and say, we just bought this corner of this and this, and here's what we want to do to it. We would like some help with infrastructure and some other things, and we'd like you to consider sharing the tax that's generated from our property. So that's what you're talking about. So we have a list of all the prior obligations, and the tax increment coming off of those properties for those prior obligations is not pledged. So that's not part of what the bondholders are seeking. So, and they don't have a lien on it. So one of the things we've talked about is going forward. So this is the I-70 Kipling Corridors Urban Renewal Plan area. That's the only one that we're talking about here because there's different plan areas. So going forward, if a developer came in and said, we want to get property tax increment off of our property, well, we've already pledged it. So there's a couple things you can do. One, they can get it on a basis subordinate to the bonds, or we can say, well, we have this cash flow coming through, and as the underwriter said, there's a 1.3% coverage. So they're always going to be structured, ideally, to have revenue left over. So each month, any revenue that comes in goes to the trustee. You build up the debt service for the year, and then once you have enough to pay the bonds for the year, then the rest of the TIF revenue, the authority can do with as they want. It's no longer pledged for that year. So we just build up the buckets until we've got it for the year. So if they wanted to go subordinate, they could do that. Or we also have an additional bonds test in these documents. So if the coverage historically has been 1.25%, or if what we have plus what we're projecting would be at least 1.25%, then you can actually issue obligations that are payable on a parity with these bonds. So what you do is you go back and you look at 12 consecutive months out of 18 months, then you add up the maximum debt service requirements, and you look at, okay, in each year, what is the maximum amount with what we have and what this developer is asking for? And is it 125% of the revenues we had over this 12 months out of 18 months? And if so, you can issue these bonds or these obligations that have a parity with these bondholders. And the reason we have to do that is because, as we've indicated, these are revenue bonds, a revenue pledge. And so the bondholders don't want the authority to be able to come in and just take revenues for other projects. The only way we sell these, the only way we get this credit rating, and actually to protect the city, because you don't want dilution either, because if it dips, then maybe the reserve fund gets hit. So it will be more restrictive than it's been in the past, and we did discuss this with the city and the authority, that once you take all the revenue in this area and say, we're gonna do a big bond issue, could be $50 million for these various projects, then the only way to get the credit rating and to get this low interest rate is to pledge them. So we either meet the additional bonds test or do subordinate. That's your
And
long-winded answer for me.
thank you for that. I appreciate
Sure.
that. And my other question is, because we haven't seen all those documents, are we electing anything under these supplemental public utilities, or sorry, supplemental public securities act?
The city is not, but the board is.
Okay, so under that election, who's deciding the final terms on the?
That's a great question. So under the Supplemental Public Securities Act 1157-201, I actually know it. That's something wrong with me. We can delegate authority to a chief financial officer, chief executive officer, or any member of the board to make the final determination of pricing. And there's a list of things: the principal, the interest rate, what we're going to be refunding, whether we're going to have a reserve fund, whether we want insurance, who we're going to sell the bonds to. And so we've elected the chair and executive director. And the reason we do this, again, a little bit of history, is before we had that, when the bonds would price, we'd have to price them at the date we had a board meeting, because we wouldn't have authority to sign anything. And the underwriters are going to go out, market the bonds, and they're going to try and lock in an interest rate. But they want a contract the day they lock it in, because they have to send their confirmations to their customers. And so before the Supplemental Public Securities Act, and we didn't have any authority to do it, we had to actually schedule pricing for the date of the board meetings. And that's not necessarily the best time to price bonds. And so it was just a scurry. So we've now got this. But there's parameters.
And
It's like, we can sell them, but no more than this amount, no more than this interest rate, no longer than this maturity. So we'll
Sure.
have parameters. So it's the chair and the executive director.
And do we have a cap on the total amount that would be for the bonds?
Yes.
We had a $50 million amount so far.
Right.
So.
Well, the numbers we got today was 65 million, and that's to build in the refunding component and the new money. But it is not expected to be that high, because as the underwriter indicated, we're expecting to sell the bonds at a premium. So like $50 million bonds might sell for 60 million. Because of the low interest rate, they just will sell for more. So
Do we have a cap listed within the
Yes.
the agreement?
yes. Well, right now, the cap we got today was 65 million, going out to 2040, selling it for no less than 98% to the underwriter, and an interest rate no higher than 5%. But
Okay.
that's just, those are the worst case scenarios.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You know a lot about this.
And Mr. Urban, this is the same arrangement we had for the city's sales tax revenue bonds, and I believe I probably have the authority to do the final sign-off. But I'm not an expert at it. We count on our team of our bond counsel and our underwriters to make sure that we're getting the best deal as possible. So, and it'll be the same with the urban renewal chair. We'll advise him. It's him now, right? Walt Pettit is our chair, and to make sure that we have the best deal.
Thank you. Additional questions? Going once? No more questions? Okay.
Well, we'll have this resolution coming forward on next Monday for the replenishment agreement and the cooperation agreement. So appreciate
All right.
your time this evening, and
Sally?
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Sally.
Thank
Thanks,
you all
gentlemen.
very much. Appreciate you all coming. That's right.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Can we get an official consensus on that before we move it forward?
Yeah, so may I
Might be
have a
nice.
show of hands on a consensus to move this forward, please? Okay, we have consensus to move forward. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Alex.
you, Mayor Pro Tem.
It's probably good.
Okay. Okay, good. All right, we will turn to our agenda item number 2. This is outdoor recreational equipment on private property. And I'll go to Mr. Goff for an
Thank you,
introduction.
Mr. Mayor. Yes. As you heard from our speakers at the beginning of the meeting, you may have been a little surprised that that information wasn't specific in our staff report, but the discussion tonight is about just in general outdoor recreational equipment on private property. We have had some issues this summer that was brought to Councilmember Weaver's attention, and we got it scheduled to put on a study session. And tonight we're not, again, specifically talking about the one issue, but how City Council would like to or not to regulate backyard recreational activities. I guess not just backyard, could be front yard too. No, I think we do regulate front yard, right? A little bit. I think that is in the memo. So it's, unfortunately our code doesn't really provide staff with enough direction to regulate something as a half pipe, as you heard about earlier this evening. So we need City Council direction on how to move forward. So Lauren Mikulak, our planning manager, is here this evening to provide you a staff report on this issue.
Thank you. Yes, here in the flesh. Good to see you all in person again. So we have talked in the past about the zoning code and that it regulates what you can do on private property and what it can look like. And historically, the code has not talked a lot about play equipment or recreational equipment, as Patrick said, in sort of a broad sense, or even specifically about the half pipe. It doesn't address tree houses or swing sets or basketball hoops or any of the variety of different types of equipment that we list in the memo. The building code specifically exempts some of those features, like play sets, from building code. And historically, we've said that if play equipment is not enclosed to the ground, not designed for permanent occupancy, and doesn't have utilities, then it's not subject to the zoning code either. Historically, pools and hot tubs have been subject to both zoning and building codes. That's very explicit in the building code. And over the years, we've seen sort of a variety of trends come and go. So the example I've talked about in the past is when American Ninja Warrior became very popular, you may have seen more obstacle courses show up sort of in the neighborhood. And certainly in the last year with COVID, when gyms and rec centers were closed, we saw an explosion in personal recreational equipment. You may have seen it in your neighborhood. You may have been a consumer. Lots of things were back ordered. The half pipe that was mentioned this evening in public comment, you may have also seen in Wheatware Speaks. Photos were attached there. That is one of the features that popped up in the last year with COVID. So as Patrick mentioned, for the purpose of tonight, we have to sort of look at this a little more broadly to understand how we can apply the code. So we're talking pools, hot tubs, playhouses, tree houses, trampolines, in-ground, above-ground, skate park equipment, lemonade stands, sort of all the fun stuff that can happen outside on private property. Even outdoor movie screens. We've got a phone call about an inflatable movie screen the other day. So what happened is last year, we formalized a written policy to provide some clarity and consistency in terms of how the zoning code does or doesn't address outdoor recreational equipment. And that policy was provided to you as an attachment in the meeting packet, and it essentially memorializes the historical approach of regulating pools and hot tubs, but not other types of equipment. We've talked to some of our neighboring communities, Lakewood, Golden, and Edgewater, and we're fairly consistent in that respect. So staying the course with that policy would be one of the options we could take out of tonight. The question, I think, is more of whether we want to change that current approach, and if so, how. We offered one alternative approach in the memo. So if you desire to more proactively regulate outdoor recreation equipment or some sector of it, then we can modify that existing policy. In that context, the question becomes more about sort of if there is a line where some pieces of equipment, half pipe or more broadly, others too, look, feel, or function in such a way that we should really classify them as structures and then regulate them more similarly to the way that we do, say, a shed or a garage or other detached structures on property, whether it's front yard, backyard, side yard. And in that respect, then you could subject something to size requirements, height requirements, setback requirements. If there is a desire to make a change, specifically in the manner that we propose about whether something is more or less permanent, we think we could probably do that by policy and not necessarily have to codify it. But it may depend a little bit on if you want to take a different approach, whether we need to codify something or not. The other thing that we want to think about tonight or moving forward would be if or how any change in the rules or interpretation would apply to an existing structure. So like the half pipe or any other play sets or equipment that may be on folks' property already. That too could inform whether or not we codify a policy change. I think that's all that I have by way of introduction. Ken was joining us by Zoom, but I'm your expert tonight on outdoor rec equipment, hopefully. So I'm happy to take any questions or discuss any elements of the memo.
Okay. Thank you. Questions from council? Ms. Weaver?
Thank you so much for coming in and talking about this. So I have been in discussions just about these various things that have been built throughout Wheat Ridge, and I guess I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to wrap my brain around if it's the policy like that we think about structures like you say, or is it like a pool? It's not like a pool, or is it a series of things like noise and privacy and does that make sense? Like addressing the thing or addressing the things about the thing that are offensive. Does that make sense? And so I'm trying to sort of understand what is the best policy in planning to sort of address that, because I don't think any of us wish to sort of get into people's backyards. However, when someone's backyard is sort of reaching out into other people's backyards,
Sure.
I'm just trying to get my brain around it.
Yeah, I expected the question of whether can we use the noise ordinance, and I think what you're asking is can we address the side effects and not the source, and sometimes that feels a little bit like whack-a-mole. So I think and we could do that, code enforcement could get involved. I don't think to date it's been an effective approach in terms of using our noise ordinance, which I know you guys have worked a lot on recently. So it probably begs the question of whether the source, in this case, the half pipe or any other type of structure is appropriate or not, or we need to regulate that sort of improvement or structure.
Mr. Stites?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I know, and I've spoken to Mr. Johnstone about this, and he's kind of said that he doesn't like the idea of regulating tree houses, and I kind of agree with that quite a bit. Play structures and things like that. Specifically, and I know you said you've gotten calls about other things, but are we mostly just talking about this half pipe, or are we talking about more than that?
It's my understanding, well, the half pipe is the reason I think it ended up on the agenda.
Right.
But just in driving around as we were crafting this to understand, are we talking about more than this? I mean, when you start to think about it, I think you become more aware of how many different types of equipment there are, trampolines, play structures, you get corner lots and there are swing sets in the front yard, and that's allowed by the code right now, and not a lot of other options on some properties for where to put it. So it's hard to we could write a code that just says giant half pipes, but tomorrow it'll be something else. So that's why we tend to try to generalize it into a bigger bucket of like improvements.
Is there a way to regulate, maybe not what something is, but the size of something?
Sure.
And that sort of thing? Or like this, like, I know it's a half pipe, but really it's 30 feet tall, 30 feet wide. It's a building,
Sure.
right? And it's hollow. So there could be ways to go in. It's a deck. So I think one of our speakers asked tonight, if she were to build a 30-foot deck in her backyard, she would need a permit, right?
Yes, yeah.
And if she was to build a shed, there would be setbacks and things like that. So how does this hollow structure, because it looks like something, how is it not a shed, or how is it not a deck, I guess?
There are specific definitions in the code about what buildings are. The approach that you've suggested is, I think, similar to what Golden does, where anything less than 200 square feet, we're fine with it, and anything bigger, then we start to say, okay, this really feels more like a shed or a garage, and we need to regulate. So I don't know how they picked the 200 number. They didn't know that when I called to ask, but it's been working for them so far. So you could pick a number and say, bigger than this, it really feels like it's a different animal, and we need to regulate it.
We do something like that with sheds, right? It has to be
Yes.
like 250 square feet or something like that.
Yes, so
right?
each residential zone district has a threshold, size or height threshold, where we say it's minor versus major, and different size and setback requirements apply. Yes, similar approach.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, if we're trying to solve it, it needs to be retroactive, whatever we do. But I would, if we can go forward, I would like us to go forward, not trying to regulate what it is, but maybe the size and the makeup of it, so.
Ms. Nosler-Beck and then Ms. Hulteen.
I also think that one thing that you talked about with the, doing the same thing that we do with the storage sheds makes a lot of sense, because there's also the component of setbacks involved, and at least with this case, with the height and people being able to peer over, and now all of a sudden there is a privacy issue. I'm in total support of going along with whatever we do with sheds and also the decks, because that is not very cool.
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This question, like my peers, it kind of brought to me, like, what's the difference between a play structure and a structure? And when our speakers tonight were describing what's in the neighbor's backyard, I mean, I think they even cited that there's utilities on it for lighting. And it seems like there are a lot of parameters that have been brought up tonight that sort of differentiate between, what is a play structure versus like a structure that starts to have these certain thresholds. And when it comes to the height, I mean, we used to have an amazing play structure for my son when he was little, and half the fun is it was tall enough to have a decent slide. And so I think we want to be mindful of not regulating what seems like, day-to-day common sense enjoyment for families and kids. But I like regulations that are close to our sheds. So that 250 square foot makes sense to me. If we're regulating that for sheds, I mean, what was described in the neighbor's backyard is, engineered and structural, much akin to a shed, with similar setbacks. And then for height, I think looking at height regulations too, something in the 15 to 18 feet is, within a story and a half of a house, and seems kind of, big enough it could still be fun, but not so big that you're necessarily impacting the quiet enjoyment of your neighbors. And then certainly anything that requires any type of utilities, to me, seems a threshold that we're not talking about just a play structure anymore. And then someone mentioned, I think you mentioned the inflatable movie theater. My neighbors have one of those too. Something like that feels temporary to me. So looking at the thresholds of something that's actually a permanent installation versus, a temporary usage. If it's something temporary, I don't feel like we need to be regulating that. But if it's, again, something that's put in more permanently, if it fits the square foot and height threshold and utility, then it seems like it would fall in a regulatory environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppy, and then Ms. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While we're having this discussion, I appreciate that everybody is really kind of focusing on the direction of what structures in general, rather than trying to craft policy around one issue that is happening in our community, and just kind of trying to remember as we move forward, keeping that in mind. One thing that I think when we look at this is that we probably need to look at also lot coverage. And I know that the sheds and decks, like our sheds policy, not only has setbacks, but it has different depending on what your lot size on it has setbacks, the size, and then also what kind of lot coverage do you already have on your lots, and so that's something we should think about. But another thing is, when I was looking through the staff memo, there were things about whether something is an enclosed structure or an open structure. And I think that's under the like building accessory structure building definitions. And so I think that we're probably going to have to look at a definition of those. If we are looking at a definition of those, however, those are basically discussing things that are on the ground. And so if we're talking about tree houses, which are typically enclosed structures around a tree, then I think that we need to probably consider, does it have to be on the ground for it to be applied, or will it be any structure on the property? And that's something we have to consider.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver.
I have a different thing I want to say, but just a question, Councilor Happy. Does the 250 square foot, would that apply enough?
I don't actually remember specifically about the code. I know that we had changed it because basically the setbacks, the way it was to build a shed. If you had a large lot, you had to basically build it in the middle of your lot, and,
Right.
and you don't want a shed in the middle of your yard.
Right.
So from what I remember, we moved it so that the setbacks were smaller, and then there was maximum size, and Lauren probably knows more than I remember, but I do remember 250, I think, being one of the larger sizes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to necessarily deal with the thing, right? Because we don't know what the next thing will be. I do think, and I was hoping to have Karen speak a little bit tonight on just where skate parks are located and for the reason they're concrete and not hollow wood. Because there is a noise issue with this as well, and it's a little bit different than having a pool party into the night. It is a very consistent and I love skateboarding as much as the next person. I'm not sure I would like it outside my bedroom. So I'm just wondering if, because it's not just the size of the structure, let's say you built a 20-foot half pipe, a 250 square foot half pipe that was hollow wood as this is. It's really loud. It's a drum. It's a big drum. And again, without regulating this specific thing, I do think we have to look at the action that's happening. It's an adult on this big drum, basically. And to give you, just, when I first heard about this, I sort of, I sort of couldn't believe it. And so I kind of want to give you the scale of this. I mean, I know you've seen the pictures, but literally, I went and sat at the corner of where the pictures were taken. And it's higher than that, if I was sitting back there, it's higher than that highest point in this building. And it's it's 30 feet, so it's easily to here. And it's this massive hollow wood structure. And if you've ever seen a half pipe up at Winter Park or wherever, I guess my question is, can I build an Olympic-sized pool just because I have the space for it? And is that appropriate in a residential zone? Is it okay to build an adult-size half pipe? And so in that way, I do feel like we do need to look at some of the specific structures and say, Denver put skate parks very purposefully in certain places because of the sound. We put a skate park at Kipling and 38th with a buffer of a block, right, on any side for residences. And so I guess my question is, Lauren, is there well, I don't know if it's noise. Is there anything in that building? How do we do that? Like, what happens if people have pool parties every night? Or is it something that falls in the noise ordinance where if you're going to use your big hollow thing, that whatever you're doing on it and beat your drums for 4 hours every night, do you have to get a permit like you do to have a band? You know, we spend a lot of time on amplified music. Sorry, just asking questions, but it's an awesome thing to behold, and I think the question then becomes, well, I think I might have said to Patrick, well, I'm going to build a goat barn with a half pipe above it, right? Because we're not regular, and I'm not saying that's the right response, but I think Leah might be thinking that, but no. Anyway, just some comments. I'd love to hear from you all on what else besides the building, because I do feel like there's a couple other issues that do relate to some different kinds of sports, and I don't have a trampoline, and I don't know all this structure, so I don't know where I'm being
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. And if counselors would please sort of speak into the mics, they don't seem to be picking up a lot of.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I looked at those pictures, the first thing I saw was the 8-foot fence. Then I saw this other thing wow, what is that? So it's not just about what's being done in a yard, it also, what is the concern about the people that are around, okay? And our regulations are a fence can be no higher than 8 feet. Then this thing is like huge, is like, how did this happen? This just didn't get built overnight. And I do know that we're kidding ourselves if we think that people in the city aren't going to do whatever they want in their backyard and things like that, because I heard about it when I was walking around talking to people, you know. But height is an issue. I mean, not only are they looking next door or anything, they're looking on the whole block, okay? So it's privacy issue, concern for others, and trampolines, come on, you don't see the trampoline in your backyard unless they're jumping. Okay, fine, they're jumping. Basketball hoop, okay, fine, whatever. Those things are not an issue, you know? But I've never seen anything like this before. I've never seen it. And I'm thinking, how did that happen? You know, so I get it about people want to have fun. They want to have recreation. There's also a concern about the neighborhood. And I think that's a huge concern. It's not just about what people want to do for their recreation. How does it affect the neighborhood? And I'm not even talking about noise. I'm just looking at this, and it's like a single-story house. It's taller than a single-story house. So that's just my comment about height. And then they want to use their whole backyard. People remodel their backyards, make it all concrete, or do whatever they want to do, have a deck and all that kind of stuff. But this kind of thing like that is, I've never seen anything like that before. Guess I don't get out much. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I mean, for some of the questions that Councilwoman Weaver asked, I mean, we do have a noise ordinance. Therefore, a call has to be made to the police department so that they can start their process with that. And so, you know, there's that piece. What we're looking at is massing of structures. So that, like, we need to not be mixing in noise ordinances and things like that into it. I will ask Lauren, though, to please answer the question on the sheds. I looked it up, and I think I found the right one, but I just wanted, I'm sure you have it. And so.
Yeah, so we distinguish between minor and major. Sheds are usually minor. The size limitations actually vary on the zone district. So what I think we were talking about is that in the R1 district, where the setbacks are the greatest, 15 feet, we changed the minor limit to 200. So we said if it's less than 200 feet, it doesn't need a 15-foot setback. That's kind of ridiculous. So that's actually the lowest threshold. In other zone districts, a shed can be 300 or 400 square feet. The setbacks are usually 5 to 10 feet. So that threshold is usually 200, 300, or 400 square feet for point of reference. You could, as one option, just to throw out, you could say it's certain permanent play structures shall be classified as structures and be subject to the minor accessory regulations, and know that they'll change depending on the zone district. Or we can say permanent play structures shall be limited to X, Y, and Z, height, size, and setback, and shall also comply with the underlying lot coverage requirement, which is something we do have for pools. So if you had an enormous lot, you could fit an enormous pool.
Ms. Hobby.
Thank you, Lauren, for that. Yeah, so like an example would be if it's a permanent play structure on, like we have R1, A, B, C, C being like our smallest residential lot, then we have R2, R3. So like I'm looking at the R1C, and it's like major has a height of, it can only be 15 feet high, 600 square feet, and it can only have a maximum minimum front yard setback. Is 20 feet, minimum side yard is 5, rear setback, so it does all of the setbacks, those are all 5. And then it says, other uses, so it's like a maximum building coverage, 40%, maximum lot area, 9,000 square feet. So we do have some, really good pieces in our code currently. We just don't say that those apply to permanent play structures. And so that might be the road that we might want to look at walking down.
Ms. Weaver?
Do we have, and because I'm not looking at the code right now, if I build a shed, can I put a deck on it, on top of it? Well, could I though, because? Okay. So if it's a 10-foot roof, is that what we're saying? Not a 10-foot ceiling, but a 10-foot roof?
So the highest point of the flat roof and the point.
Okay. All right. So if it were flat, the highest point would be 10 feet, and then the railing would be above that?
But that's how we would probably ask for a rooftop deck on the home. Oh, my mic was off, sorry. I believe so, if it was open. If it was closed, like it looked like part of the wall, then it wouldn't be permitted to go above 10 feet, because the purpose of the height regulation is to control massing, so the perceived height.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right, and I'm thinking about this structure, right? It goes up another 5 feet because
Right.
of the railing above
Yeah.
that flat
Yeah.
roof.
So just to give some numbers, because we do have those, it exceeds 1,000 square feet in size, it exceeds 16 feet in height, it exceeds the standards we have even for a major accessory structure. You're talking about the half pipe?
Yeah.
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 Mr. Stites?
Lauren, during your presentation, you said that there was possibly a procedural or a policy change that you could implement rather than a code change. What would that be? Or maybe I missed that.
So if it was as simple as saying, we're just going to regulate it the same as we do something else already in the code, so if we were just going to lump certain permanent play structures to be similar to minor or major, then we could do that by policy. If we create a separate category and say a play structure is something that is more or less permanent and as used for this purpose, then we'd probably do a code amendment. What I would also want to do, based on your direction tonight, is just confirm whether we need to do a code amendment if we want it to apply retroactively, and also what we typically do when we anticipate that something could result in a code enforcement action is we go to the city's prosecutor and make sure it's enforceable. So those couple of homework items for me will determine whether your direction tonight is simply a policy so we know how to interpret existing code, or if it rises to the level of a code amendment.
Is that maybe the best way well, I mean, you're kind of the expert. What's the best way you see going forward to solve this problem?
We can use either, so your policy direction will either advance as a policy if we can enforce it, or we'll come back to you as a code amendment if that's what's necessary to enforce it in the end.
Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm sitting here grumbling about why the actions of a few has to ruin the fun for the rest of us, and I really wish that we could be a little bit more neighborly and considerate, but I agree with many of the council members that have spoken tonight. I don't like having blanket policy that is meant to address one issue be imposed on the rest of the city. So I agree that kind of taking what our existing policy as far as sheds and accessory dwelling units, not quite that yet, but I agree with setting those regulations in place. I'm also really interested in learning that we don't regulate play structures in front yards at all.
We don't regulate play structures at all right now.
Okay, and so then that kind of leads into my next question as far as like what constitutes as permanent, semi-permanent, because I mean I've seen playgrounds erected that you could theoretically take down if you really wanted to try, but most people just leave it at the house when they sell. So I think that definition might be a little hairy. So I really like to try to stick to lot size, square footage, height. That way we don't get things too convoluted. And you kind of touched on my other question as far as like retroactively imposing it, if that would be allowed. So did you say that was going to be some of your homework to come back?
I'm sorry, I was taking a note. What was your question?
Sorry. To retroactively institute this, so that's your homework as to like if we would be capable of doing that?
I spoke to Mr. Dahl in advance of this meeting to understand what our options might be. There's nothing that's been communicated to the owner of the half pipe that would allow them to keep it in perpetuity should we change the rules. What we would need to do is, should you change the rules by code or policy, I'll go back to Mr. Dahl and make sure we have the code in place that would allow us to enforce it retroactively if that's your desire. Yeah, so having that direction clear would be helpful, whether you'd like it to apply retroactively.
Ms. Hutchinson?
Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering, what is the definition of
There's not a definition right now. There are a few, I looked at codes today. People have tried to articulate that. We did not yet try to do that, but we could. And the few things that most codes look at are size, portability, deconstructibility, and there's discretion for sure. It's a little slippery, but I do think we could create some sort of a definition that would help aid in that.
Because I even know with like a regular swing set, like with swings and a glide or whatever, people put them in cement so they don't pop up.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that's permanent, okay? And I see these things on Craigslist all the time where free, come get it, take it apart or whatever. But it's just so that it doesn't pop up and things like that. But definitely when I see huge structures, that kind of looks permanent.
Sure.
You can't lift that.
Portability I've seen sometimes in place of permanence, just because that too is a little bit of a gray area, but
Yeah.
Can two people move it at a moment's notice kind of a thing.
Oh, okay.
We have a few options, I think.
Okay.
Ms. Hulteen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, again, I'm not a engineer or construction person or code expert on this, but when we're talking about the footprint size as one of the factors that would trigger regulation, whether you set it in concrete or not, like a little play set is a little play set and wouldn't fall under any type of regulation. When you get to these thresholds of 250 or 200 square feet, there's a certain amount of engineering and permanence that goes into it by the nature of its size. So it seems like some of those just kind of fall in, the size itself creates some permanence or impermanence. An instance, again, not to regulate around specific examples, but several years ago, there was a house in District 2 on Harlan that kind of rearranged their front yard into like an adventure park. It was really, and we all saw it because it was the front yard. Do you know the house I'm talking about? Yeah. And, but they had this like, the equivalent of like a big golf backstop. Like it was this gigantic pole and netting. And, that seems like that could kind of fall in the gaps there because basically it was like a pole and some netting. So I'm just sort of curious how something like that would fall under the type of regulatory environment we're talking about.
I know the property as well. I don't remember the exact fact pattern, but I believe in that case, there is a maximum height for a recreational fence, which is a little taller than a property line fence, and I believe it exceeded that height, and that is why it may have ultimately come down. Yeah, that's the only time I've ever seen something similar to that. I'm pretty sure that's how we landed. Yeah, it was like a front yard driving range situation.
Ms. Weaver?
I'm just curious about the current shed regulation. Only because this was done with a lot of thoughtfulness, and so could I build 4 or 6 250 square foot sheds that were technically temporary to create a large impervious structure? In other words, could something like this be cut up into 250 square foot pieces under our shed law right now, or whatever it is?
Sure. So, so the similarity, I think, is that a shed less than 120 square feet is not, we don't regulate those. As soon as you hit 120 or more, there's a maximum size. So you could have numerous, but the aggregate total cannot exceed the maximum size. So
say that again.
If you're in the zone districts where you can have up to 400 square feet of sheds, you could have 2 that are 200, or 1 that is 400. So you can have multiple, but you can't exceed the total maximum size.
Okay.
And the lot coverage applies. That's sort of always our backstop.
Okay, so in this instance, it's quite a big backyard. Let's assume it's the biggest backyard. How big could my aggregation of sheds be?
I don't know the zoning, but it would be, if we're talking about sheds, the maximum is probably 300 or 400 square feet total.
Okay.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try to find a consensus to give staff direction to move forward. I'd like to ask for consensus while utilizing the accessory structure code, which is the shed code, as a guideline. I'd like to ask to direct staff to come back to study session with a suggestion of code regulations accordingly to lot sizes that include a definition for permanent structures and that follow setbacks, maximum lot coverage, and there was another definition. What was the other definition? Oh, square footage, yep, using the accessory structure as a guideline. And if they could bring that back to us also with answering the question of, can we enforce this as a retroactive? Can we enforce this as a retroactive code?
Ms. Hutchinson has a question.
Yeah, Councilman Hoppy, you didn't mention height. Did you?
Height is part of the, I didn't mention it specifically, but height, mass, setback, maximum lot coverage. Those are all parts of the accessory structure code, which I'd ask staff to use that as a guideline moving forward for permanent play structures.
Is that a question? Okay, I'll entertain your question, Ms.
Okay.
Weaver.
And I'm just, this is a point of clarification. We are not including sound right now because it's a separate issue. I do want to clarify, so just for people listening, if something is happening like this in someone's backyard and it's bothering you and it's happening for 2 and 3 hours a night, they are to call code enforcement? Is that,
Yes.
regardless if it's a decibel or if it's any sort of pool party, whatever?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to clarify to anyone listening. Thank you.
Consensus?
Okay, we had a consensus. Looks like we want to move forward with that. Okay. Lauren, I had a question also. Does the building code impose any additional requirements that may be applicable in this situation?
Not currently, though we could probably make sure that any play equipment that we classify as a structure may be subject to building code, so we can talk to our chief building official about that as well before we come back.
I think there's some life safety issues that may be involved in that also.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion to be undertaken on agenda item number 2? Okay, Lauren, thank you very much for a good presentation on this one. And are we ready for agenda item number 3 is our review of council rules and order of procedure. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you all know, City Council adopts a set of council rules and order and procedures. And historically, we used to review and amend these after, I think, every year, I think it was every year, wasn't it, Janice? The last rule change, we changed that to just when needed and when there was an issue or an item was brought up by a council member. And a couple council members have brought up some issues, Mr. Urban and Ms. Holteen asked that we address a few different items in the council rules. Then I did send out an email asking council if they had any other items they would like the rest of the council to consider during the study session, and I included all those in your packet. Mr. Dahl couldn't be here this evening, so he looked at the items that were submitted and provided some comments on the areas that he had thoughts about. The ones otherwise he just left them blank. That was meaning that it was up to City Council to decide on those issues, but he did provide some guidance on some of the suggestions that were brought up. So if you just want to go through these one at a time and get some consensus or just have some discussion.
Yeah, why don't we go through them?
Okay. The first, I'll just go down the line in your packet. The first item was presented by Councilmember Holteen to replace citizen with public or member of the public for citizen's right to speak, and replace citizen with public or member of the public throughout the document. I don't know if Ms. Holteen, you want to speak to that, or?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Okay.
We hear from a lot of people who may or may not be citizens and may or may not be residents. So it's our chance to hear from stakeholders. So I prefer the term member of the public, or public.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know, I sent out an email about my concerns about addressing citizen and also member of the public. I looked up in the dictionary, Webster's dictionary, the definition of citizen. And what I did come up with is a citizen is a native, inhabitant, or denizen of any place. A denizen is an inhabitant or occupant, a frequenter of the particular place. So these definitions, in my opinion, cover everyone, and there's no need to change the word citizen.
Additional discussion, we'll go with Ms. Nosler-Beck, and then Ms. Hoppy, and then Ms. Holteen.
I want to thank Councilwoman Hutchinson for giving that definition of citizen, and that's the Webster's version of citizen, but there is legal meaning behind that as well, and this is meant to be a public forum, and it can now be an exclusionary way to keep people out of the conversation and not making it a public forum. Even though we are using that definition of citizen here in this body, in a lot of public forums, they're now not necessarily using this language, but are using resident instead of public, or neighbor, or community member, to define what public means. So I'm in full support of replacing citizen with public or member of the public. Thanks.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also like to just say that, and I agree with Council Member Haltine and Nosler-Beck about changing it from public to member of public, but one thing to keep in mind too is citizen has a connotation that you're a citizen of Wheat Ridge, and we often have people who are not exactly citizens of our municipality, and they have every right to also give comment. So that's why I think it would be clearer to change that language.
Ms. Hulteen?
Thank you, and I want to thank both Ms. Hutchinson and Ms. Nosler-Beck for their comments. And the reason I felt compelled to ask for this is, you know, we want to hear from as many people in our community as possible. I think we are better representatives when people feel like this is a place where they can come and speak and are welcome to. And as Ms. Nosler-Beck said, you know, citizen may have a definition in the dictionary, but it has a connotation and implication in our community and society. And I want to make sure that we're using terms that don't create barriers for people where they feel like they don't identify themselves as being welcome or able to speak here. So I, again, very much encourage us to move forward with public or member of the public so that we can be as inclusive and inviting to people as possible so that we can be best informed as elected officials.
Any additional discussion on item number 1? Changing citizen to public and member of the public. Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I was just wondering if there's been any complaints as far as like this being exclusionary, or like where this came from, or if that was just like your interpretation of citizen versus member or public.
I'm not aware of any complaints. However, you know, in an overall effort to evaluate where we're creating barriers, you know, that maybe have been there for a while, it crossed my mind and I looked at what our neighboring communities have done, and most of our neighboring communities are using term public or member of the public instead of citizen for this type of usage. So, so that's it just popped in my mind, and I did a little research, and it would be consistent with most of our neighboring communities if we make this change.
Ms. Hoppy?
I just would like to also say that I did have a community member bring it up to me when they knew that this was coming on to onto the study session.
Right, I'd like to ask for a consensus on item number 1, that we replace citizen with member of the public for citizens' right to speak, and replace citizen with member of the public throughout the document.
Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did you have there's 5 hands in the air, and I'll go to a question with Ms. Dozman.
So I just wanted to ask, would it be, so like member of the public's right to speak? Are you just replacing citizens? So it'll be like public's right to speak or member of the public's right to speak? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Ms.
Hutchinson.
Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. What about if somebody's in the military or in the government? Are they a member of the public?
I think everybody is a member of the public. You know, when you say citizen, you know, in a lot of terms, it's, you know, are you registered to vote? Are you a voter? You know, that's another framework for citizenship, which tends to limit it. So if we wanted to expand the term, then it would be more expansive to not use the term citizen, I think. We had 5 in support of that, so that in our rules constitutes a consensus.
Next, you want me to go through?
Yeah, go
Sure,
ahead,
okay.
yeah.
Next item is also from Councilmember Hulteen, clean up the rules throughout to consistently use either the term chair or presiding officer. I think we interchanged those throughout. Mr. Dahl said, yes, he agrees we should do that. We should pick either or. Do you have a preference, Ms. Hulteen?
Nope, just the same term.
Okay.
Do we have a discussion on item number 2, or do we have consensus that we should move forward with that? Oh, you have a question or a comment? Ms. Nasserbeck?
I have a question. Thanks, Mayor. I just, with presiding officer, I mean, that to me actually would have a like, are we sure that that doesn't pertain to anything? Because that sounds like something different than a chair, but.
They both refer to the same person in the rules, yeah. And in this instance, yeah, presiding officer doesn't mean anything different than chair.
Okay. I guess I wanted clarity on that. It's not clear.
We got consensus on that?
Okay, Ms. Hoppy?
Oh, sorry.
Are you consensus? Okay, if you're in favor of that, raise your
sorry.
hand, and
Thought
we
you
do
already-
have consensus on that.
I thought you already did that, sorry.
I had that already.
Next item is in section 11.4E, written comments, amend to take into account comments received by the public through Wheatridge Speaks. So this is a change based on our current state of affairs, and Mr. Dahl suggested that that language could change, that written comments provided to the council in any of the online tools provided by the city or in hard copy. He suggested not to reference Wheatridge Speaks directly because we could be using different tools in the future.
Do we have discussion on this item? Ms. Dozman?
So is this kind of just like a due diligence as far as, you know, the accountability for council members in reading it on, you know, their own? Like there's no stipulation, like there's no guarantee that we would access the online tool or read the hard copy, right? So, I mean, like, but if we're here, we're listening to somebody speak to us and we can hear those comments. Oh, well, I guess you could tune them out too if you really wanted to, but just as far as, like, does provided to kind of encompass the fact that we would actually be accessing them, you know, if that makes any sense?
Ms. Hulteen, did you want to address that?
The reason I brought that up is just the way it's written here. It just says written comments are permitted on any agenda or non-agenda item and should be given to the city clerk for distribution to the council members and inclusion in the record. And so, since we have something really prescriptive about written comments, and this was written before we were officially receiving them through online forum, I just wanted to expand that and just make sure it's inclusive of how we're receiving written comments.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that, thank you.
And I'm sorry, this is section 2.4E, not 11.4E.
Well, Roman numeral 2.
Roman numeral 2.
Large A, point 4, point E.
Thank you, yes.
So do we have consensus to move forward with our attorney's recommendation on item number 3? We do, okay? Thank you. Mr. Goff?
Next items, sections Roman, you do that better, Roman numeral 2A, 2A, and 2A, 3A. I would like to reduce the number of donated time slots from two to 1 for a total of 6 minutes. As right now, the rules are two individuals can donate their 3 minutes each to another person. So one individual speaker can have up to 9 minutes. That's your current rule. Ms. Hulteen is suggesting that we allow only one person now to donate their time to another person, so they have 6 minutes instead of 9 minutes.
Discussion on this item.
I'll just comment. The reason I'm suggesting that is I like that we allow people to donate their time, and I think it's a consideration. We've seen oftentimes couples in which one couple is a more confident speaker than the other, or by couples or household members coming up, being able to combine and represent their household has been a really effective way for households to be represented. The donating of 2 time slots turns into what feels more like a campaign and less of like a public voice and being heard from the community. And so I feel like it's important we keep it because I've seen it used really appropriately and well by households. I'm not sure that there's a need to have 2 donated time slots for a total of 9 minutes.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think all the time when the times are donated, it's to the same household. So depends on what the discussion is about. I think that if they want to talk for 9 minutes, to pass it on and for them to be able to say what they want to say, I want them to be able to do that. Thank you.
Ms. Dozman.
I agree. I don't think that we should be limiting the public's right to speak, especially after having not been in chambers for the better part of a year and not having been able to hear from as many of our constituents that come to the podium. And in some ways, we have heard from constituents more. So the accessibility has expanded with virtual meetings. But I think that the rules as they stand now are appropriate. You know, each council member has their time to speak. City staff has their time to speak. We have presenters and staff, who give presentations, who answer questions. And I don't think that limiting the public to 6 minutes from 9 minutes really would make a difference. And I've seen either so few people take up that full 9 minutes or people occasionally have to use more than 6 minutes to speak. And I really don't want to take that right away from them at this point in time. So I will not be consenting to that.
Mr. Stites and then Ms. Hoppy.
I actually do like limiting it to 6 minutes. I in all my time being near council, I've very seldom seen a three slot handoff workout very well in general anyway. I don't know what you need to say in 9 minutes that you could say in 6. I very seldom see any council people take more than 6 minutes to give their opinion either. So I would support reducing it to 6 as well. I just feel like we're not reducing the number of people who can come speak because we've given more avenues for you to speak. If you have a lot to say, put it on Wheatridge Speaks and we'll be able to read it. By donating that time, you're actually reducing the number of people who are giving their opinion there down to one person. So,
Ms. Hoppy?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say I'm perfectly indifferent to this. It could go either way. However, I do want to say that in the almost 6 years I've been here, I don't think I have seen maybe once or twice it actually go to 9 minutes. So that's why I'm pretty indifferent. But Councilman Stites does bring up a good point. We do now have the Wheatridge Speaks, which that's not, you can put as many words as you want into there. And what we have also seen is that sometimes people have done Wheatridge Speaks and then have come and also testified to the same stuff that they put in Wheatridge Speaks. So I'm perfectly indifferent, and I'll go however anybody else wants to go.
Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I've been on council since 2013. I think John Clark and his boys did it once, and possibly Carol Matthews and Larry Matthews did it once. So if I can name the people that did it, I don't think it's that big of a problem. So I would say that we leave it as it is, unless it becomes a problem and people start abusing it. So I just think it's no harm, no foul, just leave it the way it is.
Additional discussion? Do we, Ms. Hoppy?
I've been taking notes. We don't really have a consensus either way. So maybe Councilwoman Weaver, Nosler, Beck could chime in, and then we could try to make a consensus from there.
Just in the spirit of providing as many avenues for people to express their views and make their voices heard, I'm not in favor of reducing this.
Sorry, just to be difficult, I'm going to take the opposite side and say that with the expansion of Wheat Ridge Speaks, I think we have given people ample opportunity, and so limiting it to one seems to make sense to me.
I think everybody has had a chance to speak. If you are in favor of leaving it the way it is, which is 9 minutes, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have consensus to leave it the way it is.
The next item is, in the same section, is to allow for additional time in the event the speaker needs translation services. And so increasing their time from 3 minutes to whatever. Ms. Hulting?
Yeah, we don't, again, this is not something we have frequently, but should someone need translation services, I mean, we're so prescriptive in this, I just would like clarity that they could have the additional time for both their native language and then translation language. So in the event there's a translator, they could have 6 minutes.
Could we leave this to the discretion of the chair? Do you think that would work? I don't know that we've faced this issue before, but we might. And we certainly did face it with our American Sign Language thing, so.
I have a question. Would this be printed in our agenda when we publish? Or would we make mention of it? I mean, again, to me, it's about inclusivity and expressing that we're making the accommodations. Sometimes people might not come or speak because they don't know they can. So I think that would be the difference between changing it in the rules and at the discretion of the chair.
Ms. Hoppy?
I'm okay with changing it in the rules just to 6 minutes rather than discretion of the chair. However, we don't already put in the agenda, we don't say you only get 3 minutes. We don't put the time on there, so we would need to actually change that on the agenda.
Were you suggesting, Ms. Hulteen, that we include in our introduction to the agenda that we provide translation services, or that we provide additional time for translation services, or?
I think I'm not making that
Okay.
suggestion. It was more of a question, so.
Okay.
But my preference would be that we change it in the rules and not at the discretion of the chair. It looked like Ms. Nosler-Beck had a comment.
My question is just about if we put that in the rules, then are we now providing translation services?
And we do.
For all languages?
We do already, and that is on the front of it, all agendas, that individuals with disabilities are encouraged to participate in public meetings. Those require an assistance, ASL, translation services.
Oh, right, I remember, okay.
Yep.
Sorry. Oh, well, good for us, that's great.
All right, I'd like to ask for consensus that we revise our rules to include, there's no suggested language in here, so do you want me just to give it generally and then Dahl can?
Yeah, we
suggest
can,
that? Okay.
this
All
will
right.
have to come back.
I'd like us to add a section allowing 6 minutes in the event the speaker needs translation services.
Okay, we have consensus on that.
Thank you. The next item is in section 3B1C. This is with nominations for Mayor Pro Tem. The suggestion is to include an option for a nominee to withdraw their name for consideration. Mr. Dahl says language that could be added that say nominees may choose to remove their name from nomination.
Do we have discussion on this item? Mr. Urban?
Sorry, I didn't have the mic on. I guess I just don't see the point in the sense that if someone doesn't want to do it, they don't want to do it, and they're going to say that. It's not like you can't, like, you're not allowed to back out because someone's nominated you.
I think you did at one point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I don't know.
Additional discussion? Do we, do we feel that we should add the phrase nominees may choose to remove their name from the nomination in our rules? If you're in favor of that, raise your hand.
Was that Dahl's addition? Who added that?
Councilmember Holteen suggested changing it, and Mr. Dahl's suggested language is nominees may choose to remove their name for nomination, only if that's what council wants. He's not suggesting we add it, but if you want to add it, that's the language he would add.
If you're in favor of adding that language, raise your hand. Okay.
So, looks like no.
So that was not, did not rise to consensus.
Next item is in section 4C. Do we need to specify who has the right to adjourn a meeting? Mr. Dahl says you could add clarification language that any meeting of the council may be adjourned by a majority vote of members present to a later date and time.
Mr. Urban.
I guess this would be where Jerry Dahl would come in handy, because when you say adjourn, to me, that means the meeting's over. To postpone it to a later date and time or to continue it would be appropriate, but adjourned just tells me it's over. So there would be no further date and time.
Ms. Hoppy?
I just want to make sure I have the right section.
Yeah, this is the current
5.
section in the code. This is section C, adjourned meetings. It reads, any meeting of the council may be adjourned to a later date and time, provided that no adjournment shall be for a period longer than the next regular meeting. Mm-hmm. So I guess Robert Rules allows you to adjourn to a specific date and time.
So the clarification is that we're changing it to any meeting of council, or potential request is any meeting of council may be adjourned, and we're changing it to
By majority
vote of members present. I suppose that it also, that when you read C, it says any meeting of council may be adjourned to a later date and time, provided that no adjournment shall. It doesn't clarify who can adjourn the council meeting. So it doesn't say even if it's the chair that can adjourn the council meeting. So this would just clean it up to where it would basically say any meeting of council may be adjourned by majority vote of members present. So it's we either change it up to by a majority vote of members present or by the chair, but either way,
Yeah, my question was going to be if we would need to take a vote then to adjourn every single meeting. Because the way I read it, it would, like, by a majority vote of members present, like.
We could say by the chair or by the majority vote of members present.
Okay.
And I don't think this refers to adjourning a regular meeting when you're finished with that agenda. I think maybe this whole section needs cleaned up, but I think this is specifically if you're going to adjourn to come back to us, to bring the meeting back to another date, at another date and time. And Ms. Holteen's clarification.
Maybe we do still say by majority of vote of members present or the chair.
Yeah, it's just clarifying it.
Yeah, I felt it was a confusing paragraph, and it was important enough to specify who had the authority to do that, so.
And just to remind, tonight's not obviously you can't make decisions in a study session with consensus. These will have to come back at a next meeting. So you can always ask Mr. Dahl for further clarification or adjustments at that time.
All right, I'd like to ask for a consensus that we revise section 4C to include any meeting of the council may be adjourned by majority vote of members present to a later date and time, or the chair.
Do we have consensus on that? We do. Thank you. Okay.
The next section, section 5B, looks like it's moving the order of the agenda.
Order the service, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Order the, yeah.
So move approval of the minutes and approval of agenda before proclamations and ceremonies. There's two reasons there. You want to explain that?
Yeah, the reason I thought of that is that I can think of several times since I've been hanging out in these chambers that we've had fairly large meetings in which there's been circumstances in which we've revised the agenda, there's been a postponement, and a lot of people have come here, and sometimes they have to sit through a half hour of, taking roll and different proclamations and ceremonies, and sometimes even amending the agenda takes some time. And so in the interest of the public who's come here to speak or participate in that, I think it would be nice to move that forward. And a lot of times, the agenda that we're approving includes those proclamations that we're about to do. So it just seems like a little bit of a order of business as well as a consideration to people who've come here in the event that their item's being postponed.
Discussion, Mr. Stites?
I agree with you that it's really nice to the public to do that. But what about them seeing all the cool stuff that we do every Monday, and they'll miss that if they didn't come?
Yeah.
I agree. Yes, we should move that too.
Ceremonies and proclamations are the highlight of every meeting, for sure.
The mayor spends a lot of time on that.
Yeah, I know.
What are crowds?
All right, well, we're all getting a little slap happy here. So I'd like to ask for a consensus that we revise our standard agenda and move the approval of minutes and the approval of the agenda before proclamations and ceremonies.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that passes.
Thank you. Next
Very good.
section, 5E. Do we need to include any references to the automatic postponement of a hearing due to a protest? Mr. Dahl says, I would not. This is well covered by the recently adopted code amendment and is not recommended to have the procedure in both places. The procedure itself is relatively complicated and should be not summarized in rules.
Do we, Ms. Hoppy?
I would say on the next two that our city attorney has advised that we don't do those, and so I would suggest that we just skip through those.
On number 9, then, do we feel that we should leave the rule to read the way it is? Not change the rule? Do we have consensus on that? If we do, please raise your hand.
Is that 8 and 9?
That was 9. And do we have consensus on number 10?
Oh, sorry.
That we don't make any changes to that rule? Looks like we do. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Olteen, for coming up with a lot of great suggestions there.
And then the next item, Mr. Urban brought up several weeks ago, a couple months ago at a council meeting on a procedure or policy now that we're going to this hybrid approach, and at least we will, hopefully more. Not tonight, but it's not your fault, Allie. We'll get there. Tonight's a test. Should we add some language in our rules and procedures that focuses on basically virtual attendance by council members at meetings? And Dahl provided some language here. We could add language that says council members are expected to attend council meetings in person. In the event of illness, weather, or other necessity, members may attend virtually by telephone or through the Zoom or other remote attendance platform provided by the city. That was his language. And then he has another item. Then he says also, if we're going to do that, we should amend section A1. Let's see, my notes got messed up here. Let's see. To remove that in the municipal building. Let's see.
Thus deleting in the municipal building.
Because there's some virtual, So they go hand in hand, those two.
Right. Ms. Noslerbeck?
I think that tonight's a perfect example of, setting some parameters around how this should go, because if I were going to be attending tonight virtually, I would no longer be able to participate. And
I thought about it a little bit before this, and then now that this has happened tonight, I'm kind of just putting this together, but I like the idea of really only being able to participate in a council meeting if it's like illness that, you know, has some kind of like special permission or something like that, where there would be some kind of exposure, rather than, I will tell you that I will dial it in from the cabin if I could, and that's not why people elected me into office, was to do that. It was to be here, and so I am all in favor of making our meetings more accessible to the public to attend on whatever platform is most comfortable to them. And I do want to be considerate to other council members that if they're in that kind of COVID-19 space, whether that's the flu or something, and so maybe that's the opportunity for that virtual platform for a counselor. But otherwise, I think that you are marked as here and attending if you're sitting at these tables or the dais, hopefully someday.
Additional discussion. Ms. Hoppy?
I'd just like to say that I agree with Councilwoman Nosler-Beck. I think that, first off, if you're sick, then you need to probably be taking care of yourself anyways and not be trying to dial into a meeting. But I, do understand if you are, let's say, got stuck on a layover trying to come into town and you missed your flight or something like that, then maybe that would be a situation where you would be able to join. But I think that in majority, we should be, if we're here and counted as here, we should be here. Yeah, or as the meeting is being conducted. If it's being on Zoom, if the whole meeting's on Zoom, it's on Zoom. If it's in person, we're in person. So I agree with that, and thank Mr. Urban for bringing that up.
Additional discussion on that? Mr. Stites?
I agree. My one thing that came up, and you just kind of mentioned it, Councilwoman Hoppy, is there's times where we've had 2 or 3 council members and staff, like in Washington, D.C., in conventions or things like that, where they could potentially be in the meeting, if we had a Zoom or a phone, because they're basically on city time, but they aren't. So that is a possibility that we do have kind of that technology now that we can incorporate that for those types of things. Not if you're going on vacation that week, but if you're maybe on a city excursion or something like that you need to be on, maybe that's a way that we can still have those meetings without disruption.
Ms. Nosler-Beck?
I think that this brings up a great point that, staff can totally present from anywhere as long as the technology is working. And so there's an opportunity that way. And I also think, as a councilman, if we could set parameters, Jerry's not here to talk about this more, but maybe you're not voting that evening, but if you're on city business, you're at least able to attend virtually or something like that. I don't know, but just so that you could still potentially make comment and participate in the conversation. Those are 2 ideas that I have.
Ms. Hulteen?
Thank you. I've kind of gone back and forth on this, in part because I am leaving on a 2-week trip on Thursday, so it's very timely and pertinent to me. And this is a personal trip, but with the option to dial in, I would be doing that because this is important to me to be here and participate. And I didn't like the thought I'd be choosing between a 2-week vacation and being able to fulfill my civic duties and participate in important conversations that impact our community. And I feel like we've spent the last year really working hard to expand access to civic voice and civic participation for everyone. And I believe that the intention of everyone sitting here is to be here and be in the room. I feel like it would be a nice option to have, so that if you elect on your vacation in London at 2 a.m. to call in and participate, because it's important that you'd be able to do that. And you know, I think if somebody is dialing in all the time, then that shows up when it comes time to get voted. So I actually feel like we have worked hard to have the ability to participate, and we might have a night like tonight when you can't dial it in which case, you know, we're a victim of technology, just like you might get the flu. But I'd like to keep it as an option, because I would be willing on my vacation to dial in for a few hours and participate, because being part of these meetings is important to me. So I'd like to have a goodwill intention that we are in the room as often as possible, and if circumstances take us out, that we'd still be able to participate. So I'd like to support being able to call it in.
Thank you. We have, let's see, Dozman, Stites, Hoppy, and Weaver in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree with Councilmember Holteen. You know, there are some situations that prevent us from being here in person. You know, most of us are parents of younger school-age children. We have pets. You know, in the event that our loved ones are homesick and we're not able to attend because we have to be there for them, but we can tune in from our home and still be caring for them. Or like Councilmember Holteen said, you know, if we want to choose to participate, even though we're taking time for ourselves, and yet we find this, you know, commitment to be worthy enough of you know, waking up at 2 a.m. and in London to tune in, I think that we should have that capability and that choice. With that said, I do agree that the intention is for everybody to be present and in the room, but I think with the changes that and the innovation and adaptability that we've seen over the last year and a half with COVID, I would hate for us to slide backwards. I think that moving forward, we should be able to be more accessible, and I would love to be able to tune in virtually if for whatever reason I can't be here in person.
Mr. Stites?
I agree with that, because the alternative is an empty chair, right? So, and that's kind of, you know, we've seen that over the years where counselors, for work or whatever, if they have to travel, some of these chairs will sit empty for a couple weeks, and I don't think that's any of us, but, or, you know, not yet, but that happens. So that does give an alternative to an empty chair and an empty vote or no vote or whatever it is that week. So I think that's pretty important.
Ms. Hoppy?
Guess I'd have to say I'm sorry, but I completely disagree. We have the future agendas that come out weekly that tell us what's coming up on our agendas, and as we're scheduling and booking our vacations, we can look at what's coming up and we can schedule around something that may be important for us. And also, I will not be calling in on my vacation. We need to have boundaries and need to take that space and that time, and I think that, you know, much like when we were talking about, are we going to do some of us virtual and some of us in person, and everybody said, look, it just doesn't feel like it's a level playing field for some of us to be in the room and some of us to not be in the room. I feel like this is a lot the same, and because we have the opportunity to see what's coming up on the future agenda, I mean, yes, sometimes things switch around on study sessions. I totally get that, but most things that are on our business meetings when you need to be there for a vote, don't change that often. So if you see that on Friday and it's coming up in 2 weeks, typically it's not changing in 2 weeks. And so I guess I would say because of those reasons and the fact that I really feel like, unfortunately, in the land of technology and Zoom, that too many people have shrunk their personal boundaries for their personal space, is something that needs to be considered. And if I'm not here, that's because I need that personal space, and the expectation that, well, Mary Schmary called in on her vacation, why didn't Janice call in on her vacation, is is not an expectation that I would like to try to live up to.
Ms. Weaver?
I would like to disagree with Counselor Hoppy for the same reasons, however. I do feel that the option is important to have for lots of the reasons that have been said, whether someone wants to call in on vacation or doesn't. I think the word that I like in here is we're expected to attend, and we're all adults, and we all can make that decision, and we do that with work, and we already do that in a lot of our position already. And when and if it becomes a problem, I think that's another conversation. But I feel like we all have our own good reasons, be it our current family situation. Because while I might not call in on vacation, you know, running a farm by myself, stuff happens, as I'm sure it does with having kids and everything else. So it's certainly not my expectation of myself. I will expect myself to be here. But I would support what the others have said, that having the option, I think is a great thing. And I also think it also says something to the community, because we have had more participation from groups that wouldn't necessarily come in. And I do think knowing that platform is available for our constituents as well is I know that we're not discussing that, but I just think giving ourselves that option if we choose to use it, if it's needed. But I think the word expectation really does explain what it needs to explain.
Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move forward a consensus to approve this and just kind of wrap it up by saying that I don't think this language would ever entail us keeping someone out of a meeting that wanted to join however they wanted to join. I think it's just making sure that we know that the default setting is to be here in person, and everything else is kosher. We can call in and vote and participate virtually as needed. I don't see it in these current rules, but I think previously we had the ability to send a bailiff to escort council members to council chambers. So you're lucky that we're at this level.
I think we did. I don't think he's joking.
No, it wasn't. No.
I think we did.
If you were inside the city limits, the council had the power to ask the
Yeah.
bailiff to go get you and bring you back. So if you weren't coming to a meeting, you had to be outside the city limits.
Corey, your father put that rule in.
So I don't think we're going down that road, but I think it's appropriate to just say this is where we want to be and go from there.
If I heard your
consensus,
was that that was a motion for a consensus? Yes. Is there a motion for a consensus?
As written, this language is okay?
To affirm the language in red in number 11. We have that confirmed? Okay.
So I do agree to consent to that, but could staff maybe fill us in on what the technological issues were tonight, and if they could be prevented in the future?
We're not quite done yet, so can we just, you can come to the table, please.
We'll make sure you know.
But,
We'll get back to you and ask after we figure it out and
we had
see
another,
what the issues are.
We have another one that Mr. Dahl suggested on Roman numeral 5E in public hearings, and it had to do with the presiding officer limiting the individual speaker's time, considering the number of speakers and the time for the hearing item. Ms. Hoppy?
I think that it's important that the, whoever's running the meeting, the presiding officer, the mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, have the opportunity to look at the sign-up list and put a time limit on it. And we have done this a few times in the past. One time when I was running the meeting, I did it and I limited it to 3 minutes and we were still here until 12:30 at night. And so I know one time Mr. Mayor did it and he limited it to 5 minutes. So, you know, it's not just, and this is public hearings because there isn't a time limit on public hearings. So, you know, I think that whoever's chairing the meeting should be able to make that call with the evidence provided and their experience in that situation.
Additional discussion? All those in favor of that provision, raise your hand. We have consensus on that. Let me see.
Okay, that was it for what was submitted, so I guess we open the floor for any additional comments, Mayor?
Has anybody got more? Because I've got a few. If you want to look at your under the Roman numeral 2, citizens' right to speak, A, 3, B, we talk about, these are citizen or public comments heard from the beginning of the study session, and I would change the word, let's see, will be heard at the beginning of the study session unless the study session is combined with a regular, special, or adjourned council meeting, in which case comments will be taken at the beginning of that meeting. I would propose that we change will to may. Do we have consensus on that? That's okay. Thank you. I had under same Roman numeral 2A, 4, G as in girl or guy or goat. I would say the city clerk or designee is the designated timekeeper. We've been using the mayor pro tem while we were in the virtual Zoom format, and I thought that was pretty effective. Beg your pardon? You know, I was going to say the city clerk or his or her designee. Do we have consensus on that? Okay. All right, let me see if there was anything else. On section Roman numeral 4D, referring and number 3, referring to executive session, it reads that if at any time during the executive session a council member feels that the matter is being discussed other than that stated in the purpose of the executive session, that member should so state and may request that the executive session be terminated. I would like to have, after terminated, something that termination isn't the only provision that the member can ask for, but the member could ask for the discussion to be returned to the matter at hand.
I guess I would consent to that suggestion, but ask that Mr. Dahl reviews that.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. Okay. So after terminated, or the discussion be returned to the stated matter. Otherwise, if we get off onto something else, all we can do is terminate the meeting. Okay, so that was, okay. Okay. And then the other one that I got was on Roman numeral 5, F, on ordinance's first reading, and the last sentence in that says, amendments to a proposed ordinance may be made during the first reading. We don't do that, and I would propose that we strike that. Ms.
Again, I would say that our city attorney has directed us that first readings are specifically to set the time and date for the hearing, so I would consent to scratch that.
Do we have consensus on that? With
With
advice from the
of
attorney? Okay. And there may be a reason not to do that, so that's, makes sense to me. That was all I had. Any other changes to the minutes anyone's looking at now? Okay. So we will conclude our third agenda item and go to staff reports. Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple items. Chief Murtha was going to provide a staff report this evening, but there was a last-minute update on Senate Bill 273, which was formerly Senate Bill 62. This was the jail depopulation bill, essentially. If you remember that, Bill 273 was basically killed in the Finance Committee today, I think the mayor said. So we don't need to provide an update. But the bill was just as bad as Senate Bill 62, at least in our opinion. Was going to provide a lot of restrictions on our courts and police department. So that bill was killed. We're hoping that there's going to be some committees formed over the summer to hopefully come to some consensus on these issues, because there are some issues that need to be addressed. We're having our second public meeting on the Lutheran Legacy Campus visioning process. It is virtual this Thursday, June 10th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. So if anybody's out there listening, please join us Thursday, June 10th, 6:30 p.m. and it's a virtual meeting. You can find that information on the city's website or at What's Up Wheat Ridge. And we're hitting a major milestone at the Clear Creek Crossing Project. The SCL Lutheran groundbreaking is this week, so we're excited about that. They've been doing a lot of dirt work out there already, but their official groundbreaking is this week, so excited to see that project move forward. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Elected officials reports. Raise your hand, Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as most of you know, I have sat on the executive board for the Colorado Municipal League this last year. My seat is up for re-election, and I have to apply by the 12th, and I need a consensus from council to reapply for that position. So I'd like to have that if possible, please.
I'd like to ask for a consensus that we support Councilwoman Leah Dozeman in reapplying for her CML board position.
Can we see a show of hands on that? Hi. Can you raise your hands up high for that? Okay, that's better. Okay, thank you very much. We do have consensus on that.
She got 16 votes. That happened.
Thank you for your service. Okay. Additional elected officials reports, Ms. Holteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am really excited. This Wednesday, Ms. Nosler-Beck and I and several of our community members and city staff are competing in the All-America City competition. And we have just a really exciting skit that we've been working on that really talks about how we've stepped up to meet challenges in our community by really working together. And we feel great about it. We're really excited. We're one of 10 finalists, and they are awarding 10 designations. So we're feeling really good and confident that we will find out Wednesday night that we have won the award. So if anyone wants their picture taken with this, there's a social media competition that we are competing in, and I'd love to snap your picture. But please, I especially invite our peers to watch us. It's at 11:20 on Wednesday. And if you haven't received an email on how to dial in, please reach out to me or Ms. Nosler-Beck or Allie, and we'd be happy to hook you up. You can watch it live on Facebook. And we're just really excited and really incredibly proud of who we are as a community. It's just been exciting to work on, and a lot of what we're talking about is stuff that has come from our community members that we've been able to work with. So, Wheat Ridge together.
Okay. Miss Nosler-Beck.
I just wanted to quickly ask if maybe this week or something, Patrick, I could get an update, and probably Councilman Dozman, on the Rocky Mountain bottling plant and just where things are at with the construction. I know that we just sent a letter out, but we're coming up on the year, well, I think we just passed the year anniversary from when we did some of our driveway sessions, and I'd like to be able to go back to the community and let them know where things are at.
Yeah, I think the last letter they sent out gave an update on construction, I believe. There is, it's unfortunately, a little bit of delay. There's a delay in a delivery of some of the items that they need for the wall. My understanding is they're moving forward with putting the footings in and such, but they were hoping, because we sped the process up and got it through Planning Commission fairly quickly, that they were going to have it completed by June or July, but it's pushed out to August now because of the delay in materials. I did get an email today, it's funny you bring it up, from somebody at the plant, and they're working on their first quarterly report back to us. They have to do decibel readings, so they're proceeding with that.
Thank you. Any other elected officials' reports?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to acknowledge that as of this morning, the management team that has worked on helping the city and the staff through the pandemic held its last regular meeting. It will reconvene if there is a need to do so. For 15 months, I had the privilege of watching our excellent management staff lead us through the pandemic. Name another municipality that did better than we did. Dead silence. I thought so. And we owe them a debt of thanks like war veterans, because it was that stressful. And we should not walk away without acknowledging that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Stites.
Just a quick one, Mr. Mayor. Applewood residents, let's talk. The virtual meeting will be Saturday, June 12th from 8:30 to 10 a.m. So check the whatsupwheatridge.com on that.
Thank you. Ms. Hulteen?
I have a question. With Clerk Kirkpatrick, can we just legally rename you, Steve, to Clerk Patrick? It's just be so much easier for all of us.
I have T-shirts that say that and a hat already.
Good, okay.
My wife beat
all
you
right.
to it.
It seems like it's been done. So Clerk Patrick, his mention, we 15 months ago signed the order, Patrick, giving you a lot of executive authority. Is that something that we're going to be revisiting anytime soon, or do we need to keep that in place with the federal funding coming through?
I believe we set it up to expire when the governor ends the state emergency order, which I don't know if he's done yet. So it's still in place until I think that expires. That we said it automatically expires when the governor releases.
Okay. All right.
Unless if you guys want to do it sooner, we can bring it back. But I have a feeling he's probably going to be releasing a new public health order soon to cancel that. But
Okay. All right. As long as we're keeping our eye on it. Not that that hasn't served our community well, but don't want it languishing out there. Thanks.
Additional elected officials matters, and then we have one more item on a staff report. Ms. Scheck.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks so much, everybody. I would ask the city clerk, is there another city whose main computer died on the first meeting back? To council, I just wanted to apologize to you all. You know, we've been testing. It was working last week for a retirement party. It was working on Friday. It was working at 3 o'clock this afternoon when we tested this and had staff zooming in from their desks. So, yeah, it's stuck in a reboot cycle. When I was talking with IT about it, he's like, oh, that's bad. So what I have on my little list of things here is need backup computer. So, you know, we'll think of ways to be able to hit pause on a meeting. Basically, the Zoom runs, that's our brain. The podium computer is the brain of the operation when it comes to, in fact, every meeting that we've had on Zoom has run through that computer, believe it or not. So it's really unlucky. I don't think there's another word for it. Given that this was a study session and we didn't have anybody needing to present, we didn't have any other members of the public on the back end on Zoom, we decided it was fine to move forward, provided it's on Channel 8 and YouTube Live tonight. So we'll get a backup process in place. I've got another little list. Being up on the mics is something we haven't had to do in 15 months. And it's the equivalent of not unmuting yourself. Tonight, there was a lot of equivalents of not unmuting ourselves, right? If you got to get right up on the mic. So it's just, there's a few things that I think are just going to take a little bit of practice. So thanks for your patience, and so sorry about that this evening.
Thank you.
You want to bring up June next meeting? You want me to? You going to bring it up?
We're going to go back to the Zoom format for our next meeting. Does that sound okay?
We got really good at it, didn't we?
It was fun to see everybody, but maybe once a year on an annual basis. So, I guess we should talk about what our format looks like next week.
So we have a regular meeting next Monday, June 14th. Are you all comfortable of heading back to the dais? Okay. Easy enough.
And can I just ask for clarification? We set this up tonight, just like we promised we would back in March when we had that discussion. The only thing we didn't do were masks, but we did everything else the same. So am I hearing that moving forward, all of our former protocols, so the wall will be closed, we'll have the audience this side as normal. Great, thank you.
Back in the ring.
Now, how do we adjourn meetings?
Okay. Is there any more business to come before the council? This meeting is adjourned. That's how you adjourn the meeting.
Everyone, good job.